Let's get into it. So first, for the people who aren't following closely, why is Bill Ackman all of a sudden a hero, and who is Bill Ackman? Why don't you maybe give a high level framing, and then we'll get into the weeds a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to give it a summary here, but I guess that's the theme of the podcast, right? So let's start with who Bill Ackman is. So he's a hedge fund manager, Pershing Square Capital, I think. Most famous for his short position against multi-level marketing, Herbalife, right? So he kind of came to prominence in terms of the media through this pretty aggressive short position against a company that I don't even know what they did. It's like a supplement, or basically it's a multi-level marketing pyramid scheme. So the idea is if you recruit new members, you got some kickback, and so naturally numbers can look really good, but then ultimately if the things don't actually sell, the merchandise, then the scheme collapses. And so if I recall correctly, basically he identified this, and then part of, I think, what his type of hedge fund manager, where they go, activists like publicly short something, it's actually about getting the narrative out in the media and making it so that the market starts to believe whatever the short seller believes. And we actually, this more recently related to tech. There's a pretty well-known short kind of like investigation type hedge fund that came out against Block Square last year. So last March, he dropped, and I forget the name of that one, but they were the ones that also did the like major break, kind of like expose fraud in some billionaire guy in India. It was like pretty big thing, and it like kind of blew up his whole, I think he was trying to do an IPO in India. So anyways, this is a type of kind of move. And so the whole goal is to get the market to believe what your position is. And then obviously, because it's a public stock, you could have already been short. And so in the case of Bill Ackman and Herbalife, he was short. So the whole reason to even talk about this, and the financial stuff is actually less relevant. He's a billionaire, successful hedge fund manager, arguably one of the main inspirations for, if you've watched the show Billions, Bobby Axelrod. It's like Stevie Cohen, Dan Loeb, and Bill Ackman. If you kind of make them a composite, that is Bobby Axelrod, and he's Jewish, and he is also a Harvard alum. And so 10/7 happens, all the stuff that falls out of that. And then you had the whole kind of donor push that you had at Penn, at Harvard, et cetera. And I think he was involved in that, or I actually wasn't even really paying attention at the time. But I think he really got put on the map with this whole congressional hearing, right? Which ultimately the president of Penn was forced to resign. And who the other two is, Harvard and MIT. And so now he's successfully removed the president of Harvard, and we can kind of get into the details there. And as in, the kind of the last 48, 72 hours, he's now at war with MIT because side thing, Business Insider decided to go after his wife, who happened to have worked at MIT as a professor for, I think something like 15 years. So, Bill Ackman is kind of doing two of the three university presidents that appeared. So it'll be really interesting to see how all this plays out. But why are we talking about this, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about the cathedral in this podcast. And when I think of the cathedral, you kind of have media, government, and the university system. Harvard is at the top of that pyramid in the system. It is the top of the multi-level marketing that is higher education. And so Bill Ackman knows how to go after multi-level marketing schemes, and he is going after the woke industrial complex that, or as David Sachs might call the woke madrasas, that are American higher education and starting with the top, and he just won. And so I guess we can get into details, but that is that a good enough summary? And I mean, there's a whole bunch of branching topics we can get into, but
this seems like the first time where someone is fighting back from who's not the left at one of these cathedral sort of totem poles and is actually winning. Like the fact that the Penn president got fired, the fact that Claudine Gay got fired, and those were sort of fired off of Twitter or off of X, seems like it's incredible progress. I mean, Harvard said that it wouldn't fire Gay like a week ago, right? And just too much pressure forced her to resign. I didn't know that these organizations were susceptible to that much pressure. Otherwise, why didn't we put the pressure sooner?
Yeah, so let's break that down, because I did tweet this. Is that having kind of more knowledge than most about what it takes to build a Twitter or an app that has Twitter-like functionality. I think that the death of Twitter X is obviously just cope, and it's a bunch of people who ended up on Threads who don't like Elon, cherry picking whatever stat they can, right? And the reality is, let's see Elon's financial position, but Tesla's doing pretty well, right? Like there's a difference between 2022 closing the deal and where the kind of markets are now. So there's a version where even if Twitter doesn't make money, and as much as like people want to cope on it, advertising, he actually literally has FU money, which he did publicly say FU to all the advertisers. He can just keep running it, right? I mean, there was a point where the New York Times was actually going to go bankrupt, and it's like, what is it? Carlos Slim from Mexico basically helped bail them out. So the reality is, and obviously the Washington Post is a Bezos passion project. So Elon's the richest, might as well own the actual most important commons, which is Twitter. And I think that we've brought this up so many episodes where everything is downstream of Twitter. And this is, I think, the latest great example of the battlefield, the intellectual battlefield in the United States, and therefore, kind of, if you believe the United States is the global superpower, the kind of worldwide intellectual battlefield is Twitter. And yes, there are things that can go into that meat grinder, but ultimately, winning on Twitter is actually translating into real results in this case, which I think we've also brought up the like Drake line of trigger fingers to Twitter fingers. Well, in this case, like the Twitter was actually much more effective in removing someone than obviously physical violence, which we do not condone. But to step back, I think it's interesting if you just look at the timeline. So you have kind of the 10/7, you have the donor kind of pushback because of these viral TikTok type videos of pro Hamas student protests. And like, let's be intellectually honest, I don't think all of them are pro Hamas. Like I think that there's a legitimate way of being pro Palestinian, but I think that that nuance was not well articulated, and especially when you kind of do protests, a week later after this brutal attack on Israel, it's kind of like doing it after 9/11. It's like time and place, people. But that's where we got to. So you had all this donor pushback. A lot of donors are Jewish. Interesting thing here is like Kanye West made all these very bold claims and basically got wiped out from a cultural cancellation standpoint because he was being anti-Semitic. But like kind of that video where he's like, I'm not going to say it. A disproportionate percentage of the donor base relative to population are Jewish, and so they're looking at these crazy students going, "What the hell?" Like, the university's not letting right-wing speakers on campus, words of violence. But then when people are actually saying, calling for genocide, like, and open to interpretation whether you believe that it's true or not. But put it this way. Charles Murray showing up to your campus and creating like a huge protest, and then the university not allowing someone to come and speak relative to some of the things that were being said for these pro Hamas protests, demonstrations. You got to be consistent. Otherwise, people are going to point this out. And so I think you had that kind of that stewing kind of like, hey, what's going on here? Like, how aren't we able to do this? But then I think that was kind of there. But then you had the Schelling point in the congressional testimony, and it was just even if you want to be able to kind of send the signaling to the woke people, you could have given an answer that was calling for the genocide of any group of students is hate speech. Like that would have been a super simple, like kind of don't answer directly, but you can actually not have your job get taken down. And they all basically tried to like outwoke each other by kind of like, ooh, I'm not going to get trapped by your congressional question. And that kicked this whole thing off. And Penn was first to fall. And then I think Harvard, which you have to also look into the kind of like how the dynamics of this work. Harvard's board, or I don't know, the corporation's board, whatever legal structure they have, Penny Pritzker is in charge. And so, never had to work a day in her life, inherited all her money. So first of all, like, that's what I usually think of those types of people. But you have, she was the Commerce Secretary for Obama. And the way she got that job is she did a bunch of bundling for Obama. So she bought her role in the administration, and afterwards ends up running Harvard at the board level. And it actually turned out, at least if you believe some of those stories, that Obama was actually one of the ones kind of pushing to try to keep Claudine Gay, who obviously is the first Black president of Harvard and had only been there 6 months. And the other element that, this is just a rambling conversation, but the other element that we're not even talking about, that Bill Ackman's one part of this, right? He's kind of the face of it, the long tweets. But our friend Chris Rufo has shown back up into the narrative, right? Critical race theory. I'm generally kind of like fine, you're doing this, but it's not going to actually make a difference. And maybe you know this. I think he partnered with some journalist who actually quit their job because they believed that there was a lot of plagiarism before, and they'd been independent for a whole bunch of, at least some period of time about like, hey, like, this is happening. And so based on this kind of firestorm that started to happen on, President Gay, based on the congressional testimony, then you had the plagiarism bombshell get dropped. But what was really interesting is in early December, like the first week of December, the Harvard board came out with a public letter. Like you can go Google this, it's on the New York Times, where they basically said the language she used at Congress, she could have phrased it better. And then the plagiarism accusations, duplicative language and sloppy citations. Okay, so that was the first. They were going to try to sweep this under the rug because obviously, if you were an undergraduate student at Harvard and you had done that, you would have been kicked out. Like plenty of people giving examples of that's against the academic code or whatever. These people, very high importance, but the relative things, no one actually reads these papers anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But so they were willing to kind of back President Gay, and then the story came out and said Obama was actually one of the ones kind of saying, hey, like, we should really push back against this. We can't have Chris Rufo dictating or Bill Ackman dictating the, who's president of Harvard. But I think that the clever thing that they did is they held back a second wave of plagiarism accusations. And I think if you actually think about how this tactically would have worked, if they had just dropped the entire cache of all the plagiarism accusations in the first go, easy to sweep it under with that tactic. But after you use that tactic, you can't use that tactic again. And so for them to say, oh, there were only a couple of instances of, duplicative language or BS, right? Then they got hit with the second one. And so at this point now you're going to have to kind of like adjudicate in the court of public opinion that every time she gets accused of plagiarism, which, I mean, they nailed it. They had like these images that were perfect for social media and for Fox News, where it's like, here's the language of the other professor, scholar, and here's Claudine Gay. So this is a very sophisticated psyop, really. I mean, or info war, like whatever you want to call it. Like it just like it absolutely hit. They hit right over the holidays when it's already a slow news week. So this is just like prime for social media. And basically she couldn't recover from that second hit. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of pressure that was coming from donors and things like that, but they lost any moral high ground that they were able to say under that original kind of BS excuse. So she's gone. And now the second whole part of this is Business Insider goes and writes this hit piece off of Bill Ackman's wife is Israeli. She's a professor at MIT for 15 years, and she's now an entrepreneur. And they're doing the same thing where they did the first one where she like missed 8 quotation marks. And then the second piece that they just dropped with even more kind of examples. It's let's see. I actually haven't gotten to the details, so I don't want to speak to the specifics outside of the counter accusation from their side is that she basically paraphrased Wikipedia. So it's like, okay, like, so basically it's a source, but it's like an ever evolving source. I actually don't even care about the plagiarism stuff. Like, this is just all like, it's like a purity test that I don't have any skin in the game there. Like, I actually don't even care about Claudine Gay's plagiarism. Doesn't matter to me. I actually have more of an issue with her inability to condemn genocide. But I think, so Bill Ackman, they went after his wife. He doesn't seem too happy about it. He's had a bunch of very long tweets where he basically said, okay, I've been in business a long time. I'm in the kind of dirty business as a short seller. The rule, and it's kind of like a mafia thing. It's like, you don't go after the women and children. Well, you cross that line. So now I'm going to have to make it my job to kind of eliminate all of you. And so he's going after Business Insider through their parent company, Axel Springer. And he has now declared kind of like a open season of let's check for plagiarism through the entire faculty of MIT. And I think the most recent tweet today is he's kind of putting it out there saying, like, why don't we just do this for all of higher education? Because they're, kind of holier than thou attitude of, we're serious scholars. But the reality is they probably, a bunch of people don't pass the kind of like academic handbook that they assign to the undergrads. We're a very interesting time. I think the best meme I saw is the domino meme, where it's kind of like, it's just like 10-7, and then it's just like American higher education is like completely wiped out. And so we'll see. I think, and now with these AI tools, like, it probably makes it way easier to try to find this plagiarism. So yeah.
And Claudine Gay, who I didn't even know of a couple months ago, right? How many people care about who the Harvard president is? She is a representative of what many people think about are the problems with higher education. One is an overemphasis on DEI in the sense that that's her like scholarship, and she's not even a real scholar. There was a tweet joking that she was a scholar's scholar, i.e. a scholar of other people's scholarship, and that she's a plagiarist.
Well, that's a plagiarist, right?
Yeah, exactly. She's produced very few works. Like, she's not a respected scholar. She's an administrator. She's a DEI bureaucrat. And that's what these universities have become, just DEI administrative arms, right? To go from an intellect like Larry Summers to Claudine Gay is a metaphor for what's happened in higher education and what's happened in other institutions in our country too. So she's not qualified for the job on integrity grounds or scholarship grounds or donor grounds, right? Donors are mad at her. And yet they didn't want to fire her. And they didn't want to fire her because they thought it'd be a bad look to fire a Black woman. And so she, and poor her for becoming this sort of representative of everything that people don't like or don't want our higher education institutions to be. They want our higher education institutions to be places, for veritas, for truth, right? For scholarship, for competence. And instead we have these, Claudine Gay makes $900,000 a year. These DEI bureaucrats make insane amounts of money paid for by our tax dollars. Why is that happening?
Well, let's Harvard gets federal funding, but the reality of the percentage of the budget of Harvard that is federal funding, I don't think is maybe it's material. I wouldn't assume it to be material. If it is, even more so. But I think here's the thing. I actually think she got a bad beat. Like, any other. She doesn't go to that congressional testimony. She just answers like anyone getting called for genocide would be a violation of the student handbook.
Yeah.
Probably not going to piss off the woke people, or it's easier to deal with those people. She's fine. She's happy at Harvard. She's there for probably 6 years, 10 years, and then she goes on to the next thing. So I actually feel kind of bad for her because she's never done anything wrong in terms of the world that she lives in. Right now, whether or not I think that the whole DEI kind of industrial complex should exist, put that to the side. I actually think it's just like she really got a shitty beat. Like 6 months ago, she was pretty happy. She's like, oh, wow, I'm president of Harvard. This is pretty awesome. So work on your congressional testimony and just be able to give like a diplomatic answer, even if you don't believe it. Like, come on, like this is like 101.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real quick, what's the easiest choice you can make? Taking the window instead of the middle seat, outsourcing business tasks that you absolutely hate. What about selling with Shopify? Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US, and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Whether you're selling security systems or marketing memory modules, Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. I've used it in the past at the companies I've founded, and when we launch merch here at Turpentine, Shopify will be our go-to. Shopify helps turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And Shopify helps you sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. With Shopify Magic, whip up captivating content that converts from blog posts to product descriptions. Generate instant FAQ answers. Pick the perfect email send time. Plus, Shopify Magic is free for every Shopify seller. Businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/momentofzen. Go to shopify.com/momentofzen now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/momentofzen. Well, it's interesting because some people are asking, hey, how does 10.7 relate to DEI? How does Bill Ackman, start off being concerned about 10.7 and then somehow, writing screeds about how DEI is actually racist, which it's hilarious that he discovered it in 2024, but it's also hilarious that people have been complaining about it for a decade and done nothing or very little to fight it. Bill Ackman discovers it or, claims he discovers it. And then a few weeks later, he's like making the most progress that's happened in a decade since it started. And here's the connection. Basically, a lot of anti-Semitism in the US can be partly explained that by the fact that Jews are seen as white people and thus the oppressor. And DEI is sort of the part of the broader oppressor-oppressed sort of dichotomy. And, it's a little bit like what's it called? The midwit meme. On both sides of the midwit meme is, in terms of explaining this ideology, is white people bad, everybody else good. And Jews are white people. So there's no fighting anti-Semitism in the US without also fighting anti-whiteness. And I think a lot of Jewish people are very uncomfortable with that thought because they want to be sympathetic to people who've struggled, who wouldn't. But any program that systematically reduces the amount of white people is going to reduce the amount of Jews too. And Jews are going down in numbers, in matriculation numbers, as a percentage. That the Jews have been steadily being a smaller and smaller percentage. People are wondering where are all the Jews going? And so you can't be pro-Israel and pro-DEI. That's just how
I think we've established on this podcast that the Jews as white people is probably one of the dumbest things you possibly could do. It has no basis in history, right? So, people who want us to do the 1619 project somehow erase all of the oppression that's happened to Jews, or call it World War II happens and everything else happened after that, they're good. But we're just going to erase all of that. And so it's just, it kind of you lose me there. But I think that the challenge for a lot of these, this kind of donor class is they are, whether they're, kind of an entrepreneurial, like, start a hedge fund, they're a billionaire, they still live in the milieu of the professional managerial class. They live in New York, they live in LA, DC, San Francisco. And so they want to hang out, get invited to the cool dinner parties and hang out with the cool people. Like you play that game, right? Like you probably keep your political views a little bit more to the chest. And you're not that offended. Like you want to be on the board of MoMA, you want to go to the Met Gala, like you just kind of you go through it. And I think once 10/7 happened, and just given how much more social media is kind of in your face and like the information zipping around the internet at the speed of light, you get exposed to some of the radical craziness that actually exists on these university campuses. And I think if you're intellectually honest, it's actually not as widespread, the like crazy end of things, but that stuff gets on the internet, right? In the same way that like during Trump, like any crazy thing would get all over the media because that's what sells. And so I think a lot of it happens where it's like a TikTok or something, and then it gets reposted to Twitter, and there's one of these accounts that you probably see, and then it just goes viral from there. And then Elon actually probably amplifies a bunch of this because he'll respond with like interesting, seems concerning or whatever, but that obviously gives it a huge algo boost. Which is again another point of like the fact that Elon, just by virtue of how many followers he has and the way the algo is tuned, which I think he gets actually like some additional weighting, it's like owning the most important newspaper in the entire world, right? Because he's dictating what trends and just by virtue of using it, he doesn't have to even go tune the algo too much. So just by virtue of like, he's doing a bunch of stuff at the border right now, like in terms of just retweeting stuff or quote tweeting, that gets more play. Like people are going to actually see that. And they talk about it in newspapers as A1, right? It's like, what is on the front page? What is the column on the far right? Like that's the main story. That's Twitter, right? And no one's actually looking at print newspapers anymore. Even if you're a New York Times subscriber, when I go to the New York Times in the morning and you go, that's already changed. Like there was a previous era where everyone would see what was the front page and there was like a canonical version. So our version of that today is Twitter. And so I think all of this stuff kind of bubbled up after 10/7, and these donors are kind of saying like, hey, like I thought Harvard would say genocide is bad against Jewish students. I'm Jewish. I'm donating to school. My son or daughter is there. And the inability to, because of this kind of oppressed, like, oh my goodness, like if I say anything positive towards Jewish people, that therefore I am supporting, or I'm an oppressor. The woke stuff has rotted people's brains, and so I think that's been the biggest exposure for a group of people, and that group of people tends to be a little bit wealthier and more influential, at least within the donor base of these universities. And so I think it's a big wedge issue. I would not be surprised, and we've talked about this before, that you see Jewish voters tack right, and hard to measure that, right? But I in my own conversations with people who are Jewish, who are New York Times reading, as liberal as they get, I think they're having kind of second thoughts about the direction of the Democratic Party, and maybe things snap back. But my sense is we're getting more extreme. So we're going AOC after Biden's gone. We're going hard left. I don't think a centrist. And even look at like Gavin Newsom, right? Like he's trying to kind of do it, but he's the most woke state in the country. So I think that's where we are, and so that's going to be I think a big political shift. I actually don't believe, like we were kind of arguing in the group chat before. I don't actually think this changes Harvard, right? Like you get someone who's a little bit more savvy. They just don't state things maybe as extreme and are more diplomatic and smarter about condemning obvious things that piss off donors. But other than that, like you don't change the radicalness of the faculty. You're not live streaming the seminars that are kind of like radicalizing the next generation of young minds. So I don't think it actually changes much, but it's kind of like a nice victory. And I think this is my critique of Chris Rufo, and this is like a Curtis versus Chris Rufo thing where, Curtis has written a little bit about this regarding critical race theory, is like you prohibit critical race theory in public schools. Did you change the actual teachers there? Like the teachers who work for the teachers union, who you could argue are creating all these issues with the education system because there's really no accountability. And like, if you look at a charter school with the same population of kids, they perform better. So clearly something is not working with the way our public education system is working. But you got critical race theory banned from the official curriculum. Great. Like, I think I'm much more on you need new institutions, and that's not a short-term fix. Like, you're not replacing Harvard's prestige anytime soon. But then again, I would say YC and in Teal Fellowship, that's 15 years. That's in the scheme of things, that's a pretty big accomplishment in terms of creating new alternatives for talented young people to kind of look for a credential that gives them the confidence to go and do something that's world changing.
Well, I tweeted the other week that Teal Fellowship should try to compete head on with universities. I think right now it's basically it's proved it's accomplished its original mission, which is to see if it can get 20 talented people a year to not go to school and have them be successful. It's done that in spades, and it's done it so well that if they were to compete head on with Stanford or Harvard, and create a university that the most talented people who want to get into tech have to choose between Harvard, Stanford, or Teal Fellowship, I think they're the only institution in the world, aside from YC also, who could actually get the best of the best at scale to choose Teal Fellowship. I don't think UT Austin or UATX is not going to do that at this moment. I love that team and what they're doing, but you have to create a better career offering or a more prestigious group, and that's what Teal Fellowship has done. You can't just compete on we're going to seek truth, because people aren't going to seek truth at the expense of their career and future flourishing, whereas Teal Fellowship and YC are just more elite. So I hope that they do that. They're not going to, probably. And this goes back to the other thing, like, there aren't going to be new Harvards soon. We're founders, we're investors, and so we think about starting new companies, and so we think about starting new institutions, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I think one thing that I've really been awoken to the last year that I never really thought about is more of the private equity mindset. More of the, hey, it's not just that you could start a new company, you could actually take over existing. I mean, Elon has shown this with Twitter. Obviously, not everyone is $44 billion. Not every company or organization is up for sale, as you mentioned. But Bill Ackman is showing this to some degree with Harvard. Right? He's the activist investor. Like, he's the ultimate, at what he's doing right now. And I don't see him stopping. I see him continuing to wage a campaign to get Harvard donors to dictate Harvard. Chris Rufo is not going to dictate Harvard, but donors will, right? And so the big question is, who's the next Harvard president, the real president, not the interim one. And is it someone who's just has the same ideological agenda of Claudine Gay? Or is it someone who moves things in a more Elon direction, more of the original mission of the university? And this will determine whether Curtis or Chris Rufo is right. And we're going to have Curtis on next week and can come, talk about it with us further. Finally, we've been teasing, Curtis since the beginning of this podcast. But Curtis called out Chris Rufo, basically said what you said, which is, hey, it's an empty victory. You think you've won, but you've actually lost, because you've shown your cards. You've created this like boogeyman idea that all teachers are pedophiles or whatever, doing crazy stuff, which people don't believe. And you're like the boy who cried wolf. And instead, they just put a new, call it, instead of critical race theory, call it something else, teach the same thing, and you've actually made things worse. And Curtis thinks that the best thing to do is to actually do nothing, basically. Like, let them it's like in basketball, you pull the chair, you let them trip on themselves. You only fight when you have a chance to win. If you fight when you don't have a chance to win, you only make them stronger. You give them, and this was his critique of Trump, which is he tried to drain the swamp, but he actually made it stronger by not fighting to win or not fighting competently. And if you look at the last few years, Trump hasn't been in office, sort of a pull the chair move. There hasn't been any boogeyman, and the left has been kind of eating itself or unable to find another enemy to justify its crazy activism. So this is the big debate in culture, or in a certain part of culture, is Chris Rufo right or is Curtis right? Can you actually change things, see them through the way that Elon has done with Twitter? And can we do that across the cathedral, across other organizations? Or are you only making it worse? Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/zen. That's netsuite.com/zen to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/zen.
Yeah, but I mean, they're coming for Elon pretty hard. So I think I fall more in the Curtis camp, but I think look, I'm an entrepreneur and very much someone who thinks of themselves in the arena. So I think action is more important than just kind of ideas. And I think you can do the Elon takeover of Twitter because Twitter is a company and he is wealthy enough to pull that off, right? I don't think you can take over Harvard because the president of Harvard doesn't impact the tenured faculty. And yes, maybe we are able to kind of get rid of maybe people are able to kind of eliminate a bunch of faculty through this plagiarism crisis. Great. But you it's so entrenched. And so it's actually the same thing as like if you think, and this is very much a Curtis point, if you think winning the presidency allows you to change or reform the government, you're naive because of the civil service and civil service reform and how the executive branch functions at this point. Now, maybe you get someone who is, quote, American Caesar, who comes in and says, no, we're going to just tear all this down. I'm going to take you to the Supreme Court. I'm going to say, no, the executive branch, as per the Constitution, has full control of the executive branch, just like a company. And Congress, you actually can't just like pass laws to regulate how I do things on the executive side of things. You can give me funding, but that's about it. But the reality is like the government, the deep state, like that exists. Like people aren't going to necessarily change how they do things. I mean, I see this in a practical example is within the kind of Treasury Department. All of the policies over the last 10 years around crypto, from the most part, depending on whatever administration, are the same. You have some high-level, top-level policies. Everyone loves to kind of talk about Gary Gensler, but the reality is, like, if you just go through all the different departments within the Treasury that have an impact to crypto policy, that policy has stayed the exact same. And why? Because it's actually set by the permanent bureaucratic class, not the appointed. And so I'm skeptical that these things can be reformed outside of like a true, FDR, Lincoln, as Curtis would say, American Caesar, which people don't like, but that's his point would be FDR is actually the reason we have the world we have today for liberals is because FDR basically pushed the limits on, at the time, what was acceptable within the kind of set of norms of the federal government, right? Massive expansion of the federal government, threat to pack the court, seizing gold, doing all these different things, running for more than 2 terms, on his way to doing a 4th. So I think outside of something like that, I think government's not going to get reformed. And then I think within the universities, what are you going to do? Are you going to have, you can't, like the way tenure works. And so I'm much more interested in Teal University or whatever you would call it. But I think the challenge with the Teal Fellowship is it self-selects, or it selects for people who actually care about doing stuff. Like, as much as I would like a kind of university of super elite people that is not woke, the reality is you actually don't really learn anything in university. Some people who are in kind of, I think, STEM within specialties very much get an extremely practical and valuable education. But I think mostly what the university bundling is a credential with a network. Your mileage may vary, but you can study whatever you want pre-med as long as you get the MCAT score. You have the right package from a resume standpoint. You're going to get in, right? And same thing with law or even business. So I think the practical aspects of the education system are not really there. And so at that point, like the people who want to be Teal Fellows is like, they actually want to go change the world. They just don't want to be in an academic setting. It's like, do that in your own time. There's actually an interesting tweet. Mark, I think, retweeted it or something. Someone talking about the root of scholar. Did you see this?
No, I didn't see it.
It has to do with leisure. And so the idea is, as a scholar, it's you're so wealthy or so set in life is you actually have leisure time to then actually read or think about the world. And I think that's actually the bet. It's just like the university system loses relevance in the same way that I think the media has lost relevance, and that people just don't believe it, right? Like after COVID, like you just expert, right? And so I think what you get to is, I'm going to choose who I want to actually believe. And it's like, how do they cite their sources? You know who's really good at citing his sources? Curtis. Like you read a Gray Mirror or any of the unqualified reservations posts, it's citation after citation after citation after citation. You can go, you read it yourself. And so I like, now, is that going to change culture tomorrow? No. But I think like anyone who wants an independent perspective and not something that is like corporate fed, whether it is the New York Times or Fox News, is going to seek stuff out on the internet. And I actually think, if anything, the AI stuff is only going to make that easier, right? I can go train an AI on an ongoing basis. I can feed it a kind of sphere of stuff, right? People have always talked about like a personal Google that you've tuned. Well, I think that these LLMs probably get us there. And then at that point, like you can just be like, oh, Dan's LLM, like that is actually how I want to get the news, right? Like people are always talking about, oh, I want unbiased news, or I want from multiple perspectives. Yeah, I can go do that for you. And it can actually then say, hey, I want this through I want like Thomas Carlyle's, how would Thomas Carlyle interpret this, right? Like that's basically what Curtis does. He's like Carlyle or Machiavelli or any of these thinkers, which you have their whole corpus of work. By the way, none of it's under copyright, so you don't have to worry about like them suing you. And then you basically, it's character AI, right? Like you just feed the current article and say, how would they understand this, or extrapolate what Thomas Carlyle would have believed about the entire 20th century, compress that in, and then have them go through whatever we're doing now. And so I think you're just going to get way, way more intelligent takes on from any angle. And then it's just like, what do you need a university for, right? You need the credentialing and the network. Okay, fine. Maybe then you can just do YC or something like that. But yeah. I think the farce of education is going to go away once these AI tools get better. Like it's going to be the best tutor in the world. Bloom's 2 Sigma. Go look it up. Like it's like everyone gets a tutor that is infinitely patient, infinitely smart. I think this is something that Mark wrote in his essay. People who are or have any amount of agency or like self-determination are just going to be able to go to the moon. I'm so jealous of a kid that's 5 today, just to think of like how their education is going to go, because they're going to have access to the world's entire knowledge set with like the smartest possible thing that like you can tune in terms of whatever perspective that you want.
Yeah. from your lips to God's ears, but I think that if right now Harvard and Stanford get 99% of the most talented kids, like if enough, size pool, I think 20 years from now, I think they'll get like 80% or something, or the Ivy League will get like I think that there will be a growing sort of minority of people who don't go to the Ivy League who have the potential to, but I really don't think. I think it's way too hard to disrupt them because, as you mentioned, the credential is what matters. The network is what matters. And it takes decades. Literally, that's what it's taken Teal Fellowship to have a network that could produce outcomes, because these people go to school when they're 18 and thus they're successful when they're like 30 or whatever. So, and then even the people that do achieve that level of success, like a YC or Teal Fellowship, don't actually want to become universities, and people still like. I bet 90% of people who go to YC went to go to college, right? So, and go to an elite college. And so I think that, maybe 30 years from now, I think there's be some period, like we might achieve AGI before Harvard or Stanford are disrupted. I mean, I remember Mark Andreessen said in a podcast to us, like he thinks Harvard will last longer than the United States. Just in terms of like the defense.
It's older than the United States, so it's already like if you just believe Lindy, it's already
So saying like Harvard is going to be disrupted is kind of like saying the United States is going to be disrupted, or in terms of like the sheer force required or what that would mean for it to become insignificant. And so,
but let me just push on. So when you say disrupted, actually, that's to me the right word. So to use Clayton Christensen's framework, disruption does not come with an equivalent from day one. It is a low-end thing that slowly works its way up the food chain, right?
Yes.
And his example is the mini mills with steel. And so the idea that is you start out with an AI thing that is low status, but like so to me, it's like the disruption of Harvard as a result of just you offer something that basically on an ROI basis is just so extraordinary that you actually are like, that credential and that network is not worth it. But I think that the challenge is humans are social. And so unless you think AI is going to change that, which maybe it does, that network and credential, like that is like a really powerful entrenched thing, because people want it's automatic status, right? Yeah. I can go from whatever class starting here, and I can launder myself up instantly, especially in the US, where now I am in the elite, right? You can come from whatever thing, but you graduate from Harvard, you are now elite. Even if you have a bunch of student debt, even if you end up going and working for Business Insider, you're elite. Like you just like you've put yourself in a new class. We don't have titles in the United States, but we have class. And so I think that that's the hard thing. And so it requires a certain type of person that you call it a little bit more aspy or a little bit more like doesn't care about that, who are willing to kind of go do that on something like Peter Thiel or start a company or just do whatever. The interesting thing is, like, basically when I was in college, like I was like interested in starting businesses, and at one point I wanted to go drop out. I thought it was cool. It's like Zuck did it, Bill Gates, like whatever, didn't do it, right? But what I noticed was a lot of the people who are interested in entrepreneurship in college, at a place like Duke, they weren't the top of the academic pyramid, like in terms of just like raw horsepower from a like university standpoint. They were a little bit more misfit. So obviously they got into the school, but then they were kind of like seeking alternatives. Whereas I think that just like the true, 1%, top 1% or whatever, for the most part, they are very happy sticking to the plan, right? Like they're going to take the trade of excellent university credential network, vaults them into whatever they're interested in. And so that's who you're competing against. And that's as a group very hard, right? So obviously the kind of misfit who starts Figma through the Peter Thiel thing, Dylan Field, great. But that's one person versus, thousands, 10,000 a year that are kind of like getting minted into the kind of normal elite that follows within the cathedral. So I think that's the challenge. But look, if you go from 99% to 85%, that's still a huge victory.
Yeah, it's huge. Ironically, Dylan went to Brown before going to Teal Fellowship, and I believe met his co-founder in Brown, or made some critical contact. And it in some ways, it seems like the ideal path is to, if certainly if you're going to drop out, at least get in first. Show that, because so much of it is the credential, right? So much of it is that they chose you, and that you have some sense of network. And so if you go to Harvard, drop out your freshman year, one, you get the stamp of approval that you got in, which is most of it. But then also, you still have access to the network. You still can go to any Harvard person ever and say, hey, I got in, and they still, will treat you almost like, someone who graduated. And in some ways, in startup world, maybe even be more impressed because you recognize the opportunity cost of your time. Shows you're mature, independent-minded. Anyways, I think it's fair to zoom out.
One thing I've always thought was interesting, so it's less on for undergrad, but I always thought that just like Harvard Business School should just basically offer two packages. You can pay the whatever ridiculous amount of money it is to go to Harvard Business School, and there are legitimate reasons for people to go to business school. You were in the military, you had a different career, you actually want to get yourself into business. Is a great way to break it. But you work in Goldman Sachs, or you're in private equity or consulting, and you go to business school and then you go back to that, like it's just a 2-year vacation, right? But I always thought it would be kind of interesting is if you could just opt to say, no, I want the I got in certificate, like just so I can say it's like, yeah, I'm like Harvard Business School quality in terms of like that level of selection, but I didn't want to go spend 2 years. Like I want to keep working. So They won't do it, obviously, but I think that the core thing to think about the American university system at the elite level, I think less at the more vocational, although there's not enough people doing vocational stuff, and I think typically you have a bunch of worthless communications majors in the world, which is completely a 4-year party, right? Thank you, federal government, for subsidizing that. But the under the like everyone deserves a college education, right? Okay. So the way to think about the elite American education system is it's just a credential. Like the percentage of people who actually learn something that like meaningful in college that is relevant for what they do day to day. Yes, you might have some life experiences or some read some book or paper or take a class that's important to you, but relative to the entire time you spend there, it is a finishing school for elite. And if you're not from elite, it's a way for you to mint your status. It's like minting an NFT of saying, yes, I am an elite person. Which, by the way, doesn't really get you that far, right? Like, so in a prior era, that would have been like, oh, he graduated from Harvard. Like, ignore the graduate schools. You now are eligible for these doors are all way more open to you. But like, if kind of like everything's a curve, right? So if you're on the back half of the curve at Harvard, like, yeah, you have a Harvard degree, but you're not doing anything that interesting, right? Because the challenge is like you want to get a job in consulting or banking. Guess what? There's a set of slots for your entire school, and you're competing against people on the end of the curve. You don't get to compete against the kind of like other people from other schools. And so that's the other thing that people I don't think appreciate is in some ways you're better off going to the least elite school you can and just be the best at that school, because then all those doors are going to be open for you just by virtue of it's not like they're like, okay, we're going to let in everyone from Harvard, whether it's graduate school or a job first, and then we're going to work our way down the list. It's just like, no, you take the best people within each school. And so that is one thing. So if anything, like if you don't feel like you are, and so many people think they are special snowflakes so that they can't resist it, but like if you're actually not like true top 10% at Harvard, you probably should go to like a school that's slightly less, get more of a scholarship or something, and then finish the top 10% of that. It's actually going to probably put you on a better career trajectory. But then the reality is like what it actually is in the world is there are a set of, 24 companies across a variety of industries that are the jobs that launch you into high velocity, high trajectory careers or entrepreneurship. Those are the two. Like but if you just look at like the just like go through the top, 10 VC firms in Silicon Valley and look at where all their associates, they all have basically the same background. It's like this set of schools, and they all worked at the same kind of companies coming out of school, and then into the VC game. And so like how does that work? Well, that's actually the new thing in the new economy. Like basically it's like, who cares where you went to college? The college is just the first entry test into getting yourself into one of these 24, 30 elite jobs that you can get right out of school with basically no experience. Or you have the second path, which is entrepreneurship, which, apply to YC or whatever. And that's where I like, I appreciate that Bill Ackman he's like playing chess when everyone else is playing checkers. Like he's looking at this. We didn't even talk about this. Like he's used to dealing with extremely sophisticated actors on the other side of the table where he has his own money at stake. Right. And if you believe capitalism is meritocratic, like you actually probably have very competent people on the other side relatively, versus like, obviously he's competing against a bunch of, jokers at Harvard. So I appreciate that. Like he is just like perfect for this role. Like his whole job is to convince the market that something is an underpriced or undervalued trade, so that he can make money, and usually being short something, right? And so, that said, like I'm just like, okay, so you replace the president of Harvard, okay? Like what do we solve any of these issues? Do we get more housing out of that in this country? Probably not. So no. I don't know. Like that seems to be a more pressing issue. Like let's focus on that.
Before we wrap, I want to further discuss why I think higher education is so corrupt, in the sense why I care about all of this. There's a few elements of why it's so problematic, why two guys in their mid-30s care so much about what's happening at Harvard or other leading institutions. So first, let me just address cost. College debt, something like $2 trillion. Government spends something like 3% GDP on it. And the incentives are misaligned, where the more money the universities get from the government, the more expensive it gets. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme. We have a federal loan program funded by the taxpayer, so students can then go into debt and then keep paying via taxes to fund other people's debt. And basically we have this thing that happens in housing, as you mentioned, in healthcare, where government restricts supply because there's a accreditation, sort of cartel run by the universities or university adjacents that determine who can be a university. It's so hard to get accredited. So quality remains stagnant. And then the government subsidizes demand with taxpayer funding. So the actual customer is not the actual customer, is not the student. They're not looking. The prices just keep going up. The government keeps subsidizing it, and the debts just keep getting bigger and bigger. So one, it's like bankrupting a lot of the country, but then also it's engaged in this massive social engineering program where the differences between a Black or Hispanic person on an SAT score and an Asian person are incredibly significant, right? So they're discriminating, obviously based on sort of characteristics that don't have to do with the content of your character. So they're massively social engineering. Plus, they are incredibly left wing. Basically, it's not only that these people are not being prepared for the real world. Like 50% of college graduates don't get jobs after. There's like a insane amount of even masters. I think it's like what is it? I have it here. There's over 5,000 janitors who have master's degrees. 100,000 people with bachelor degrees who become janitors. 37% of people who take jobs require just a high school diploma. So we're massively overeducated in terms of, so people aren't getting the bang for the buck. There's social engineering, i.e. not picking fairly. They're going into massive debt. And then they're also learning sort of anti-Western ideology, anti-capitalist ideology. And, there was this big debate a decade ago. Matt Iglesias used to write about, Ezra Klein used to write about, and I think both those guys are pretty smart, but they used to write about saying, hey, who cares what's happening on these universities? Who cares? It's just a couple of crazy kids. And then what happened is that those crazy kids graduated and then ran the most important institutions in our country, or got power in those institutions, like the New York Times, who outed the opinion editor for having that Tom Cotton op-ed, and they basically took over. They put the same ideology that they were sort of propagating in college, and they propagate it in the real world. Wherever Harvard goes, that's where the world goes, because that's what our elites graduate Harvard. So whatever they think at 22 is likely what they're going to think at 32 or at 42. And if you see a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas sort of a contingent in universities, they're going to graduate, they're going to go in the real world, and they're going to take those same biases with them. So if you're pro-Israel, you should be very afraid, because where Harvard goes, the world goes. And so that's why this matters. That's why sort of the ideologies or the bent that the elite universities have is it dictates what the country will have. And the real question to wrap this up, at least from my end, is like, who is the next president, right? If it's just a Claudine Gay lookalike or sound alike in terms of ideology, then there's no progress. But if you're Bill Ackman and you are continuing to wage this campaign day after day, and you take over the donor base, if the donor base basically votes with you, it seems like you can pick who the president is, or you can maybe pick who the board is. And if you can pick who the president or the board is, maybe you can change tenure. Maybe you can change some of these policies, just like Elon did at Twitter. I don't see why. Maybe I just don't know enough about Harvard as run. Maybe I'm totally naive. I'm a armchair hobbyist here. But if you get influence over the donors, you get influence over the board, get influence over the president, what else do you need to change some of the incentive problems? Where am I crazy here?
I don't actually know enough about how tenure would be changed. I'm assuming it's like every university just adopts the same policy, because it's actually kind of like a recruiting thing, where it's like, how do you recruit really expensive engineers in the zero interest rate environment? Like, how do you recruit great professors? You give them this thing tenure. I don't think there's like a congressional act that like defines tenure, right? So I think it is a kind of like a voluntary thing. That said, I think that the simplest way to solve the higher education problem in the country, as it relates to like the country's issue, is the government should just stop subsidizing it.
Yeah, well, that's the last part. Yeah, that's the last part. Is why is why are these institutions getting tax exemption on their $40 billion endowment or whatever they're like on so many of their organizations? Why are they getting all these government benefits?
So I think the way to do it is a couple of things. So the first is stop subsidizing it. If you want to subsidize it, tie it to, you don't have to pay federal taxes if you're paying down your, so let people write off loans against federal taxes later, but don't like give the universities any money. So basically allow students to decide that they want to go get debt in the private market. Okay.
Yes.
And at this point, the private market will develop pretty fast if this is the case, right? The problem is the government's involved, so therefore it distorts a lot of it. So the private market would basically say, okay, hey, I'm in the education lending business. What major do you want to do? I want to major in computer science. Great. Well, here's what we loan. Like, what did you get on your SATs? Okay, we have a program where if you actually share your grades every quarter, you get a cheaper rate, because like we know you're actually going to be a good investment, because ultimately that's what a loan is. It's like you're assuming you're going to be able to pay back. And then the government can basically say, great, like we will allow you to offset up to just like the mortgage interest tax deduction, which is a huge program, but it incentivizes home ownership. We're going to do this for education. But you, the individual, need to actually have full responsibility for the debt. Second thing, though, we're going to give the individuals as a kind of, tool, is you can declare it in bankruptcy. So if you really don't have any money and can't do it, you can declare bankruptcy and you don't have any of your student loans. Okay. So what will happen overnight is no major that has no career prospects or value to society will get funded. Because it would be like, I'm not going to fund basket weaving or gender, theory,
Studies.
whatever BS major, because this is not actually valuable. And we should not be funding this. Like, the government should not be in the business of allowing you to pursue whatever dream you want. Like, the government should be it's like, what is valuable to society? We don't need any more gender theorists. What we need are, semiconductor manufacturing people. Like, so whether you're going to be the electrical engineer or you're going to be someone who maybe is like a technician on the line, like you're going to actually be able to go in this marketplace and actually, figure out what. So very quickly, the market will actually start to price what the value of each major is. Instead of these like surveys of like, what is the average earning lifetime? No. Like the loan market will actually figure that out pretty fast. And if you can disclose it, to like get rid of it in bankruptcy, they'll stop lending to the people who are going to not have any prospects. So that seems pretty reasonable. And then if you are kind of rich, post-economic, whatever version you want to call it, and you want to go study gender theory, that's your own money. Like free country, go do it. Great. But that's one thing. And then the whole second thing is like university endowments, really basic. I still actually don't understand why Harvard doesn't just remove itself from federal funding. And I've gotten like better examples of like, well, you have all these researchers who actually their whole goal is to write grants, but Harvard has like a $50 billion endowment. Okay, 5% of that per year is 2.5 billion. Like you can't run a university for 2.5 billion just where you're just taking it off the earnings, right? Like Sequoia, A16Z, like Bill Ackman, like all of these funds are actually the ones driving those returns, right? So it's like the irony of all of this is that Harvard is the bedrock of capitalism by virtue of its endowment, right? Like they are the LB of LPs, like in all these things, in all these universities. And so really basic, they should just get themselves off the federal funding. And then I don't actually care what Harvard does, because then I don't have any taxpayer skin in the game. No dollars, you do whatever you want. But the second thing is, the moment you take federal funding, we should actually start saying, like, wait a second, no, like actually you have a big endowment that you don't pay taxes on. So we're going to start taxing you because like above a certain amount, like we're going to say, sorry, like the max endowment you can have is a $10 billion endowment. You don't need any more than that. You don't even spend it anyways. It's just like it's almost like a scoreboard just to say you have a big endowment. And it's like, yeah, you build some more buildings or you hired some more administrators. But the reality is like above a certain amount, like, people, the same people who want billionaire taxes on Elon, right? Who take capital and put it into productive uses would not want the universities to get taxed because it's higher education. Well, it's like, pick it. Like, you want billionaire tax on all everyone? Great. Billionaire tax on the universities and on the churches. Let's actually pull all this like BS all nonprofits. So you have a big endowment as a nonprofit, great. You pay taxes too. Would change it so fast is if you actually just had some market-based incentives for the majors, and then you actually force the universities to pay some taxes. That probably wouldn't change their political bent, but the kind of like fact that they can kind of grift, like they're actively hostile to what I think are mostly American values, yet they don't pay taxes and they have massive endowments. It's kind of crazy. And the interesting thing is you probably won't get VCs to say this because obviously they don't want to piss off their LPs. But I don't have any LPs, so I can actually say the thing that everyone wants to say is tax them.
Yeah. And I think there is some merit to the idea that there are some things worth learning that don't show up in jobs or don't show up in the market. The core curriculum or something, great books, et cetera.
What percentage of college students do you think actually read even like a small percentage of those great books?
Not only that very few. So not only do they not engage in it, but I think the things that are being taught are actually net negative for democracy, even though the argument that they make is that they're critical for a democracy to function. And it's sort of like, the theory and practice of what actually gets implemented is often anti-Western, anti-capitalist, and even anti-democratic, but in the name of democracy, right? We need to sort of, tell the voters what they need to do. I mean, what's funny is Peter Thiel and David Sachs wrote about this in a book almost 30 years ago called The Diversity Myth. They chronicled what was happening at Stanford in the 90s or late 80s when they were in school. And it kind of reads like it was today. It's insane. I mean, and the book was so controversial that they had to apologize for it. And now they don't have to anymore because it's a vibe shift. They can say that they were right the whole time, but they saw it all coming. This is not new in 2024. This has been happening for many decades. The last thing I'll say on that topic is, to be clear, I'm pro university. What I want is a free market. I want government to, as you said, stop subsidizing demand, stop restricting supply, let 1,000 flowers bloom. To your idea of private debt, let sort of, the people, let the market be an actual market where customers are the one, or students are the customers. They're picking based on what value they get, and we have thousands of entrants trying to offer the best services. And we don't have any Silicon Valley entrepreneurs really innovating in higher education. We have Minerva, maybe a couple other experiments. Joe with UATX, but if it was as easy to build a university, legally as it was to build a social network, or even close, we'd have probably a lot more entrants. And so I would love to see people competing to make a better product that helps people either get jobs or fulfill some other needs. So I'm pro universities existing, and I think they offer a great service. I just want it to be a free market so that we get better product and you get way cheaper. Like, it should be 100x cheaper. Instead, it's going to be 100x more expensive. The price is like rising, significantly. So that's my final take on. And then I also want politically diverse or ideologically diverse universities as well. And I think if there was a free market, we'd have something representing where a big part of the country is.
Well, I want to take a little bit issue of like free market. It is a free market. Like, I think that there are some in a world where government, provides a lot of subsidies in terms of like funding, and I think you need accreditation or whatever the set of requirements are. Yes, there are some gatekeepers, but the reality is I can go create a university tomorrow. No one's going to stop me.
Well, tell that to Austin Allred. He had some challenges on the regulatory side. We should actually have him on at some point.
Sure, we should talk about that. But like, I think the reality is like he's offering some school over the internet, which is a completely different thing than like creating a university in a specific location. Yeah. The answer I would say to you on the great books thing is, one, I don't actually believe anyone reads any of that stuff. So like, sorry. And then two, this is like the Matt Damon line in Good Will Hunting. It's like, $1.50 in late fees at the public library. And I do think we have a concrete example of this, and this is a good way to wrap the episode, is our guest next week, Curtis Yarvin, Mencia Smallbug. I think he said that he's done a bunch of reading. We should ask him next week. It was the Internet Archive, like this like crazy left-wing organization. Maybe not crazy left-wing, but like they're definitely a little out there. Put a bunch of books and then Google Books. Like, so it was like he basically, they put all the books online and no one was reading them. And so he started reading them. And so my sense is like, I've learned more in my, 18 months on sabbatical than I did in 4 years in college, just because I wasn't worried about grades or job or whatever easiest class that I could take to pad the GPA, like all that kind of garbage, which was what I was doing in college. But instead, it was just following curiosity and kind of engaging with people, whether it's in chat groups on Twitter, like, and so this is where I'm just very bullish on AI, right? Like LLMs, there are a bunch of things LLMs I don't think are going to be that good at. Time will tell. But I do think one thing that they're incredibly good at is you put a bunch of text into them, and then you can get answers out, and potentially answers that someone human might not be able to have the time to read all the books to give you an answer. So I don't know. Like I maintain that the university system is going to continue to exist. I agree with Mark that Harvard will outlast the United States, and by no means am I advocating for the end of the United States. I'm a big patriot, and I believe we will be around for a while, at least in my lifetime. But the fundamental thing that it's offering is a credential and a network, and that's the reason it's expensive, and that's the reason people want to go to Harvard, not because the quality of the education is better. It is because that stamp is more valuable. And getting a world where we at least start to break apart the bundling of the value towards what you're spending your time on Probably won't happen in Harvard, but the rest of the higher education system is where I have more of an issue. And if we can just kind of reduce the number, and look, I was an English major, completely worthless, right? But like, if we had moved a kind of the system earlier, like I would have had to actually think about the job that I wanted to get, and then I would have taken that major. So I think like that is the world I would like to see. And you'd still have people take those kind of worthless majors because they'd either be rich or they'd find someone to sponsor them doing it. Great. We just have 100x fewer of those people, which I think would be good.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap on that. I think the last thing I'll add is we have a good source that is good friends with Bill Ackman that who says that Bill is not naive about the scope of the problem. It doesn't end with Claudine Gay. It's deep rooted in sort of the institution, and he's going to keep fighting. So we'll see how much progress he gets, and we'll discuss with Curtis next week. Great episode as always.
Good to talk to you.